Hello, my name's Nicola Bateman, and I'm going to talk to you about agility in operations. I'm an associate professor in operations management, and I'm sorry I couldn't do this direct to camera, but my camera on my laptop wasn't good enough. So here's a picture of me working at home, like most of you, I expect, in a kind of improvised situation. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is agility in your operations. And agility is the ability to change quickly. And in terms of operations, this means looking at your processes. And the first aspect that I wanted to look at was really the output that directly affects your customers. So you might want agility in the processes and services that you deliver to your customers. And this is really about flexibility. And your customers might be looking for flexibility in terms of volume. And that means not just being able to ramp up or ramp down your volume, but being able to do it economically. Because, of course, you might be able to just produce very little product or very low level of services, but it may not be economical for you as an organization to continue with that. And that's not viable in the long term. Your customers might also want you to be changing their delivery time. So that might be earlier or later or more specific, a smaller time slot. Or it might be about changing what is delivered. So they're saying instead of 200 of product A, I want 200 of product B, or maybe a mix of those. It could also be about flexibility in the product or service that you're delivering in terms of new products. So they might say, oh, well, we quite like this, but could you do this instead? Or could we have it in a different color or done in a different way? And so that's about introducing or changing your current products or services. And the key thing to think about here is how much do you expect your customers to want you to change? I.e., are they going to want you to double volume or just change it by about 10%? And also, how quickly do you need to respond to those changes? So, for instance, if you're providing power, electricity, 24 hours, you cannot have an outage of electricity for more than a few milliseconds. As soon as there's a power outage, people will notice and they will be affected. However, if you're a shop and you run out of a particular product line for a few hours, it's inconvenient, but it's not so much of a problem. So you need to think about the extent, how much flexibility you want, and how quickly, i.e. the extent, how quickly you need to respond to that change. So that's in terms of output, but there's another kind of agility as well, and that's really about resilience. So this is about unplanned failure, and this can be internal in terms of, say, a piece of equipment going wrong, or maybe staff shortages. Or it can be external, i.e. a supply chain failure going wrong. And this is, of course, something that we're very focused on at the moment. And it is about risk management and thinking about what is likely to happen and how much resource are we prepared to put into mitigating that problem. And that really is the assessment overall for all types of agility, is you need to think about how much am I likely to need to change? How quickly do I need to do that? You can then start to think about how many resources do I want to allocate to this. And obviously, if something is likely to happen or if it's going to have a big effect, then you probably want to allocate more resources than if it's unlikely or doesn't have a very big effect on your organization. So you're going to start to think about probability and risk management. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide, which looks at a different type of agility that you might have been aware of, which is a set of techniques which were particularly developed for software. And here is a picture of an organization using one aspect of agility. Uh, the, this group of techniques was mainly developed by consultancies to look at sort of management processes, such as software development. It was particularly important for software developers because it's not a tangible product, so you can't see it. So it was about making the processes that they were managing visible. And so they use a lot of visual tools. And here's an example of one. And what you can see in this photograph is on the left hand side the to-do list. In the middle is what the team are doing, and on the right hand side is what they've done. And this, of course, is a very simple tool. What it does do is it manages the capacity of the team. It stops them from kicking off too many different projects at the same time. And what you can do is you can limit the number of projects in your doing section. It also enables you to look at your to-do and say, right, what's the most important? And then you can also look at the done, saying, look, this is how much we've done. You can see we've got through a lot of work. That means that that maybe overtime that we needed to achieve this is justified. So it allows organizations to identify what their priorities and have a shared vision of the status of your own team. Now, there's lots of material on the internet, and you can see I've got this picture from Flickr, and there's lots of other similar ones out there. But I wanted to show you a specific application, and that's shown in this next slide. So this slide shows a picture of a team board from Mencap, who you may be aware of, a charity who look after people with mental health disabilities. But I went to visit them in February this year, and I spoke to one of their people, Nikki Skeels, who organises some of their operations. Now, Nikki has quite good training in lean operations, and some of those lean ideas underpin some of these some of these agile ideas as well. What you can see in this diagram, in this photograph, is she's got three teams: north, south, and central. And you can see it's quite similar to the similar photograph in terms of it shows the things that they are doing and the processes that they have to go through to complete their tasks. And Nikki brought this visual tool in because the HR teams who were involved in recruiting volunteers to support people with their disabilities they were falling behind with their work. And they had planners, but they were on spreadsheets, so the work wasn't visible. So what she organised was a daily huddle, and this idea of a daily huddle is part of that suite of agile ideas. And what she found was within 2 weeks, the capacity had increased and the backlog had decreased. And the reason for that was easier for the teams to see their urgent jobs, and that meant it was easier to allocate resources. That then led to cost savings, and it also improved the team spirit because they felt they were doing a better job and they felt more in control. Now, Nikki was self-taught in Agile. What she got was the resources that are available to anyone off the internet. Now, obviously, these have been put there by various people, and there are consultancies who want to teach you how to do this, and by all means, that's a way to go ahead. But you could also go through a route whereby you find out for yourself, but you might find that's too difficult a task, or you don't have the underpinning lean training that Nikki had in the first place. Okay, so let's bring these two ideas together, and that's what this next slide shows. So first of all, we looked at what did agility mean, and what you need to think about is what does agility mean to me in terms of what my customers want, and what does it mean in terms of resilience of my processes. Okay, and there are academic frameworks that look at both these ideas of flexibility and resilience and supply chains. Now, but there's also this set of tools and techniques called Agile, and these do have an overlap, and that leads us to the kind of practical next steps that you can take as an organization. So, and these mainly evolve around performance measures and visual tools. So this next slide is going to have a look at these practical next steps. So first of all, think about the type of agility that you might need. And you want to think about the resources that you are able to allocate to that type of agility. Because of course, you're always going to be resource constrained. You might think you want to be agile in all sorts of ways, but you probably don't have the resources to achieve that. Once you've decided, you then need to make that explicit, i.e. communicate it in the normal ways that you might do that within an organization. And if you're a small organization, that's probably going to be quite informal. If you're larger, then you might have to communicate that through a strategy document, through vision, through staff briefings, and so on. The next stage is then to put in place performance measures to identify the kind of agility that you think is important. The performance measures start to make the management focus in this area visible, and you can use the kind of tools that I spoke about with Agile. Agile also talks about Kanban, although Kanbans originate from outside of Agile in lean operations. There's also ideas of visual management, so you can look those up and have a look at examples on the internet. But typically the type of measure you might want to do is going to be an indirect measure of agility. It might be something like stock levels or backlog of customer orders, how long a customer is waiting for a response beyond that call times or responding to an email. So what you're starting to do is to make this concept of agility more concrete. The next thing to do is to start to put that in operation, and that means to practice it. So that means having a daily meeting. It doesn't actually have to be daily, but for most organizations, that's about the right frequency. If you work a 24-hour shift system, you might want to review every shift. For other activities, for instance, if you're on a research team, you might want to review less frequently, say once a week or once a month. What you need to think about is what's the speed that things change within your organization. And then you need to review those performance measures that identify the types of agility that are important to you. The reason that I include this particular aspect is when I went to visit Unipart, who are really good at agility in supply chains, is that they had a whole suite of performance measures that they reviewed every day to make sure that their supply chains, which go across the world, are able to respond to changes. And it means that they can detect any problems along their supply chain very quickly and do something about it. And that's what gives you that fast responsiveness. It's the ability to identify when things are going wrong, and then you can start identify quickly when things are going wrong, and then you can start to do something about it. So your fourth step is to practice these performance measures and agility and review them every day. The other part of that is then you need to act on it. If you're not taking any actions as part of reviewing your performance measures, you're kind of not completing that circle. And that actually ties on to an idea from quality management called Plan, Do, Check, Act. By having these performance measures, you're checking that your organization is operating as you would expect it to. And if you don't have that act process, the process of measuring is in effect redundant. You also want to review, if you've put some new measures in place, you probably want to review them after 3 months. The reason for that is by doing the process of measuring, you'll have a better understanding of what's important, and you might want to tweak it a little bit, or you might say, actually, that's not the right thing to do. So once you've got those in place, you probably want to review them after 3 months and thereafter review annually. The reason for that is, although you might get some great measures for now, what's important in a year's time may well have changed for your organisation. And then finally, you want to have a think about the resources and the risk. I mentioned right at the beginning of this talk about saying you need to think about the type of agility that you might need, and then you need to think about how much resources are going into that, and maybe do a formal risk analysis, like an FMEA. That's failure mode and effects analysis, which is a well-known method of reviewing risk. Okay, so I've come on to my final slide here, which has got my contact details should you want to get in contact with me after the question and answer session a bit later on today. I'm also going to put a resource pack together, which I hope the team will be able to send you, and that will have some further reading and some websites that you might find useful. Of course, these next steps that I've shown you initially could be done quite easily, but what you'll find as you start to get to know more about your performance is you might need to put in something a bit more substantial. And there's lots of things you can do. So for instance, you can run a workshop, and I'm sure there are many consultancies who would want to come in and help you with that. There's many excellent consultancies. The university, of course, can run a workshop for you and maybe get back to the team from the university who got in contact with you in the first place. Or you might want to grow your own internal capabilities, maybe through recruitment, so you can get a work placement, and we've got lots of great graduates. Or maybe you might want to take someone on something like a KTP, and again, the team here will talk to you about that. I hope that's helped you have an initial understanding of what agility and operations are all about. It does involve quite a lot of reflection on your own part about what agility means for you in terms of the type of flexibility you want and the type of resilience you want. And of course, how you go about that is going to be different for each of you because you're all in a different type of business. So I hope to hear some good questions a little bit later on, and thank you for listening.
So, excellent. Nicola, hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the talk.
Hello, I've just unmuted there. Okay, so
great. For the Q&A session, we've asked Tobias to join you, who's our Innovation Fellow for Management and Marketing in the Hub. So the way it works, we've had a few questions sent in by email, and we're also questions being fired in via the meeting chat. I don't know if you can see that.
I can see a couple of questions there. One from Buhi and one from, have I got the names the right way around there? Is it the first name first? No, it's not. So Rajinder and Anju. I can see two questions there. Okay, shall I just kind of deal with those as they come up?
Yes,
Is that okay?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Okay, so Rajinder said, how do you get team members to work in this way and develop this type of culture? And in fact, Anju's question is kind of similar. And said, as you know, most people are not open to change, and therefore, how do we get the team to adopt? And of course, it's quite difficult to get people to do something differently in some situations. But the key idea for these kinds of, and I'm going to talk about boards, because typically you would have these performance measures on a visual board where everybody can see them. And what that does is it fosters an open culture. And what I would say is that you need to engage with your teams about what you want to have on that board and what they want to have on that board as well. So you need to think for let's say you start with a fairly small group, you need to think what's important to them in terms of doing their job well and in terms of the needs of the team. So it might be looking at issues to do with safety, it might be looking to do with reoccurring problems that cause them issues in their day-to-day work. Okay, there's I don't know if anybody wants to follow that up, because that's a fairly simple starting point. The case study, one of the resources that I sent on to your team actually has a case study of a company going through this process, and they already had some communication boards, but they weren't very well used. So what they did was they got a team of each of the team leaders for their cell areas came in and helped redesign the board such that it was much more meaningful to them. So it's really about ownership of the board, and I would say do it for your own, where you work yourself, so that people can start to say, oh, well, he or she is doing that for themselves, and I can see how they find it useful. One aspect I would say is important to realize is by doing this, you are going to make problems more transparent. So you might want to do it in a fairly careful way if you're not ready to deal with all those issues at once. So as you make problems more obvious, they will be more known to the team, and you'll have to say, this is what we're going to do about it. So it has to be managed in quite a mature way. Okay. We can come back to that if we get any more issues, because I was going to comment on the next question by Rajinder, which is, when remote working, is this more challenging? This is actually something that I'm hoping to do research on in the future, because what I've been talking about here are mainly what I've described as an analog board, i.e. paper-based, or sometimes they're done on whiteboards. And of course, you can reproduce those electronically. But one of the benefits of doing these analog boards is that everybody's all sat together and you have that conversation and you point to things on the board. Now, that can be reproduced electronically, but through a medium like this, but you have to be able to share screens. And also, you do get some issues which we currently do research into, which is to do that some people feel they don't have the right to speak up. They feel that because it's all will be done electronic charts rather than maybe handwritten ones, it has what's called a higher level of perceived finishness. It looks a bit glossier, so that means they're less likely to challenge the data. So this is also to do with starting with fairly simple, accessible performance measures that people understand, and also making sure the people in your team can, when I say address, that means that they have influence and can change those performance measures. It means that they're more likely to have ownership for it. So then we've got the next question here from Arno. What does agility mean to small businesses, and what should they focus on? Well, the essential problem, which is actually the same for a small or a big business, which is it's going to vary according to what your business is and what's important to you. Now, obviously, performance measures like cash flow are very important for small businesses, because they've got to make sure they've got enough cash to operate, and they tend to have less access to finance. But that's going to vary according to your sector. So in some very specialized, professionalized fields, it will be access to sufficiently qualified people. And that's what you need to think is, what's important to me as an organization. But also, you want to focus on a limited few. So if you're trying to focus on 20 or 30 measures, it's just not going to work. The reason for that is we have a limited, what's called a cognitive workspace of about 6 or 7. So if you try to put on too many performance measures, people will just focus on the things that are important, and you haven't got a coherent group. Okay, and we all find that if we've got too many things being addressed, we're asked to address too many things at once, we just kind of drop the ball a bit, and we can't do everything all at once. Okay, what does agility mean to an entrepreneur only for daily tasks? What should she look as a focus for a startup? Well, I think this is to some extent about managing yourself. So it's about thinking, what do I need to do today? What do I need to do for the next month? And what do I need to do in the long term? So you probably, if I was going to do this, I'd think about, what do I need to do today? And I actually do this for myself. And then I also have longer term performance measures, which for an academic are things like publishing and getting grants in, and these over a much longer time scale. And you need to kind of keep those three balanced. So for an entrepreneur, it means about meeting your customers' needs in a day-to-day basis, but also think about what do I need to get in place to stay competitive over the next 6 months, and how do I make sure that I have those underlying processes so I can develop over time, and having a vision of actually what you want to do as an organization. It's a lot to think about, but being an entrepreneur is not an easy group.
Okay, I've got a question. Got quite a few that have been emailed in actually. So I'll probably I'll actually type them in actually. But the first one, I quite like this one. How do you know if your organisation is not agile?
Well, everybody thinks that their organisation is not agile enough, because it's one of those kind of aspirational things. One of the things you want to think about is obviously what you can start to do is benchmark against other organisations. And there are lots of ways you can do that. Sometimes there is publicly available data. Sometimes you can get data from people who've moved from other organizations, but also you can do what we would call a service audit, or you might call a secret shopper type audit, is when you put yourself in the place of a customer and then you say, how does that work for me? So are they answering the phones quickly enough? Are my prices competitive? So it's a kind of standard benchmarking approach, but there's lots of ways you can do that. Or as in a giant font, I can't see it all.
Yes, sorry about that.
There we go.
Okay. Well, Reginda's got another question for both of you.
Okay.
Just above that, how can agility support innovation and being creative? What are the benefits in productivity? The key question.
Okay.
That's to both of you.
Okay, so how does agility, sorry, I can't see that question actually.
It's just above the giant writing, so I'll read it again.
Oh, right, yes, I've got it. Yeah, what does agility mean to an entrepreneur for daily tasks? No, that's not the right. How can agility support innovation and being creative, and what are the benefits to productivity?
Yeah.
Okay, so I wonder if Regina, you actually mean productivity or whether you mean effectiveness. Because productivity actually means getting more out for the same input. But of course, if you're getting more of the wrong thing out, that's not effective. Okay. So agility is more about effectiveness. So it's about saying, am I making the right thing or providing the right product, right service at the right time? Agility can help productivity by making sure that you've got the right skills and the right services when you need it, because obviously if you haven't got that, it's going to reduce your productivity as well. In terms of creativity, I would say that actually an allied area. So I've talked about visual performance measures. An allied area is about workplace organisation, which is having a workplace that's organised to help you do that. And some people think that as quite a rigid thing, having your workplace sorted in a certain way. But what it does is it frees you up to have more time on creative activities, rather than saying, where's my pencil, my file, my customer details that I'm trying to do. So if you're well organized and you know where to find things, you've got more time for creative processes. And again, it's something I try and do. It doesn't always work, especially with my electronic filing, which sometimes goes a bit wonky. Okay, I'm just looking at the next question.
That was to Tobias as well. I just wondered if
Well,
Tobias.
Yeah,
sorry,
so I guess the other part for me there is that Agile is also about kind of rapid prototyping, so that the creativity comes into that process. And I think all of this process has to start with a good observation of the customer, so that it's kind of relevant and you're meeting an actual need. And then the rapid prototyping is all about building possible business models and possible solutions, and then testing them and measuring how well they do. So part of the agility is being able to rapidly create lots of new products and solutions and see which ones work, but without using too much effort. So doing things more quickly, and sometimes also not necessarily focusing on quality, just focusing on meeting needs.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question with giant writing, which I think you're probably struggling to. Shall I read that one out?
No, I can make that.
Oh, you can.
Okay. With the economic outlook being quite negative and business investment falling, do you feel firms will be willing to invest in technology and business systems to facilitate agility? I don't know that I'm that well placed. That might be more of an investment one. I think for some organizations, they will suddenly think none of us saw much of this coming, but they might see some of their competitors acting much more quickly because they've got the underlying infrastructure to allow them to respond. So, for instance, I found that for myself. So I do lectures, obviously, but I happen to lecture in some of our distance learning modules. And what that meant was I was familiar with all of the electronic ways of delivering distance learning, and it meant I was able to go over in about a day and a half for all of my learning onto an online format, because I knew I already had those skills and that infrastructure was available to me, where some of my colleagues only did kind of teaching face to face. So it's about having that underlying infrastructure. Suddenly think we were caught on the hop, really. And people might think if they have the cash to invest and the time to invest, they might think, actually, we need to do this. And I'm certain future governments will be thinking about maybe keeping some stockpiles of things in the future they might not have felt inspired to invest in previously.
So I'd just add that I think when there's less money, then I think Agile becomes more useful, because if there's less money, what new product development you want to do as efficiently as possible.
So we've got more questions coming in. I'm just trying to type one as well.
Oh, okay. While you're typing one, shall we have a look at the one from Matthew Higgins, which is about physical distance requirements? And obviously, I've been thinking about how our work lives will change over time. And obviously, there is some part of us that wants to go back to the way things were. But I think actually what organizations will realize is that they don't need to have everybody in the office at the same time, and that people are motivated to work from home. And in many ways, that allows them to do the kind of work that they sometimes couldn't do in the office, maybe some of the kind of more deep thinking, or they need a slightly different work environment that they can do at home that they maybe couldn't do at work. It also means you can access a wider workforce. If you're looking for particular skills and people aren't prepared to move to where you are, if you're only asking them to come in a couple of days a month, that means you could employ someone from a further distance. But there are risks. And one of those is that you don't get those personal relationships that may oil the wheels of most organizations. And I think organizations putting in these kinds of infrastructure to allow remote working need to think, how do we get those personal relationships and one-to-one connections between people working? And it is possible, but you need to make sure that it's easy to do. So you can come across people by accident, or you can think about shared interests maybe on a slightly broader scale. I'm interested in the long-term use of technology in my organization, that kind of stuff.
Okay, very good. So I've just added another question that's been emailed in at the bottom there after Matthew's question.
Okay, so it says SMEs are often encouraged to pursue scale to enable them to reduce their startup costs. If you're advising a startup, would you emphasize scale or agility? Depends on their market. and that's it. But the point is low low volume, fairly simple variety products or services will soon be outstripped on cost by higher volume competitors, because they'll be able to have that lower unit cost. So you've got to think, have I got this unique market? Is there anyone else who's going to be entering this at a lower cost to me? And most products and services will go through that arc over time.
Okay. So another question from Andrew.
And Andrew, I mean, I think that it's quite similar to what we said before, which is small businesses are normally quite agile. And what you might be thinking about, particularly as you're growing, is you might think, well, we're really agile in this way, but actually our customers don't seem to be very interested in that. So you need to think about what kind of agility do I need to retain as an organization, and what am I doing that might cost me more than I need to, or I put a lot of effort into, for which there's low demand, or there's not much margin or competition. So it can mean lots of different things according to your sector. Oh, and Andrew's also said meant to ask more information about the Mencap table and how it works. I don't know. Can we put that slide back up again, and I can talk through? Is that possible?
Well, it's part of the video, so we actually embedded it as a video.
Oh, right. Oh, that might be easier if I do it, but yeah. I can talk you through it. So, Andrew, so if you actually search on the internet for Agile boards or Scrum boards, you'll see lots of similar things. And the idea is that you kind of have a part in your board for each part of your process, and you have a post-it note that represents a job that you're doing within that process. What they had on their table is they had 3 teams. They're the central, north and south, and then they thought about the stages that they went through to recruit people. And so they would say, right, well, the first stage might be initial contact, the second stage might be some kind of online interview, and so on. And then they would say, right, well, we've got 3 people at this stage for north, we've got 10 people at this other stage for south. Maybe we need to kind of move some resources around from the south people to the north people, so that we're balancing how many people we've got working on each of these stages. Okay, and Rajinder said.
Sorry, Nicola. Just before we move on, there's Stephen would has told us we've missed a question. So, what of Arno's quiz?
I don't know which one he means.
So does that, Arno? Do you think there are lessons for an organisation's supply chain management that can be taken from PPE? The PPE issue during the pandemic. It must be that question.
Well, this actually I referred to it obliquely, actually, which was about governments not having what they should have thought about was the risk of pandemics coming out, which was a known risk, and they chose not to invest in those resources. The thing is, the response in the supply chain is never going to be fast enough to respond to those kinds of demands. And what we saw were lots of small units, like schools who had 3D printers, who were able to do small units of production, but that is going to be relatively expensive. They're going to be issues to do with specification and quality standards that are going to be quite hard to control. It's not necessarily a distributed network like that can be quite good, but it's quite a complex way to go about things. And it's also very hard to get a view of tying it all together. And we could see this was something that the whole supply chain really wrestled with. And they said, well, we've got stocks here, but they were in the wrong place, or it was the wrong materials in the wrong place as well. And having visibility across your supply chain, like I spoke about with Unipart, would have helped all that, but also an issue of risk management as well.
Great, thank you. Just coming back to Rajinder's question then. In terms of a workshop, would this cover the steps to becoming agile in work practices and the self-management?
I mean, a workshop doesn't exist at all. I think it might be a good thing for Rajinder to talk to you guys and say, this is what I'd need, and then maybe see if there's enough demand and how we could do that.
Well, Tobias might have a view on that, actually, because you've got a lot of experience in running workshops, don't you, Tobias?
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to explore a workshop here. I think my experience is far more with the entrepreneur and the smaller organizations, and the sorts of agility that I'd be encouraging them to focus on is making sure they don't waste time prototyping things that just aren't needed. So this time when potentially you're out of operation is a good time to reflect on your customer observations. The agility in the bigger sense, I'm sure that the Kanban method and things like that would be things that you could cover in a workshop, and just have it also as part of the whole lean management process.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we probably couldn't manage the whole lean management process in a single workshop, because it takes most organisations about 5 years. So, but we could certainly take on some ideas and kind of focus it around that kind of agile performance measures type way of doing things. And what really works well is if people bring stuff that they've started, and then you say, okay, I'm doing this, or this is what I'm thinking of doing, and you actually develop something with 2 or 3 people from your own organisation. And that's quite a good way that I've done stuff like this before.
Okay, we could perhaps have some conversations about that later then, offline.
Yeah. Okay.
So returning to the questions, I think we're on to a question from Matthew Higgins. Can you see that one?
Yes. Yeah. So many employees have had to adjust and adapt their practice very quickly following the pandemic. Do you think there is a risk that there'll be a kickback on demand for change, or do you think people would develop a taste for being in a more fluid working environment? I don't think people. I personally, I don't think people will develop a taste for a more fluid working environment. I think what they want is a work environment that suits them, and it for not to change from that. But of course, that won't be across all people. So different people will have different needs and different things. And what we're seeing, and I don't know if Steve found this in research. It's certainly some reflecting some of the research that I'm doing about workplace organisation, is that for people who have larger homes which are well resourced, and they can have space to work, they are quite keen to work from home. For people who are having to share their workplace areas, maybe with family, or are limited resources, they are much more keen to return to offices. And so it's very much about your home situation and the kind of work that you do. And obviously individuals, some people prefer are more gregarious than others. My own view is that we should go to something like a blended organization, whereby you have some people who are wholly office based, you have some people who are nearly all home based, and you say, right, everybody comes in every other Wednesday or something for half a day or for meeting, to allow them to catch up and to touch base with each other. And I think that will probably give a good compromise. But I do think the development of digital visual tools is going to be really important, so that people know where they are on projects, and so they know how they're doing, and they can have some kind of framework to talk around. So at the moment we're all looking at talking heads, but what we could be looking at is, a whole load of data to say, yes, we need to do more of this, or we need to do less of that, and so on.
Right, okay. So I think we've come to the end of the questions. Just some comments. Yes, resources or workshop, please. So I think that's it. I had a few other questions, but I think you've answered most of them.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and some really good questions. It'd be really nice to be involved in some kind of workshop, and I hope people who have the opportunity to take some of these ideas away, have a go. Don't be too disheartened. Do come back, and it'd be really nice if you could get a sort of network together based around Leicester of people going through this process.
Okay, and we'll share the links and resources that you mentioned. We'll share those with everybody who registered for this workshop, if that's okay.
Okay.
So thank you very much indeed for the talk, Nicola, and for the question and answer, and Tobias. Yours is the last talk of the day, so
Yes, go out there and get in the sunshine, guys.
I can hear an ice cream van outside. So thank you very much to everybody who sent in a question, and that concludes Innovation Friday.